Okay, you are here listening to Lloyd's podcast for a class project that I'm working on, but maybe it could continue on later down the road. But right now, I just want to spend a couple minutes talking about food deserts here in the United States. So before I get into that, I'm just going to open up. Like I said, my name's Lloyd. I'm a student here at the University of the District of Columbia. I'm a sophomore, political science major. And I hope everyone who's listening to this possibly is staying safe when they can. At the time of this recording, it's April 24th, 2020. We are in the midst of a global pandemic, and I just want to make sure that everyone is social distancing, keeping safe, checking in on their family and friends when they have the chance to, and just really trying to help people know that we will be able to get through this, and that this will end soon. So, with that out the way, what is a food desert, right? When you think of desert, you think immediately of just dry, barren land, nothing really going on there. You think of like Egypt, or even Antarctica is considered a desert because it gets little rainfall a year. And I thought that's a little interesting thing. But a food desert is actually a place, a stretch of land, right, where there's little to no real healthy food that's easily accessible for people to get. So here in DC, depending on where you go, there's a lot of food deserts all around Northeast DC, Northwest, in some parts, Southeast DC. Really, anywhere in DC, you can find a stretch of land that's a food desert where people just cannot get quality produce, fruits and vegetables, really clean food to get. So I just want to really highlight that people need to know that these exist, and that I do want to propose a way that we can try to solve the crisis of food deserts here in the U.S., because they are a budding industry that have been popping up more and more as time has gone on, with McDonald's continuing to grow in popularity, Burger King, Wendy's, what's some other fast food places? Five Guys, Chipotle. Even though they do have some good produce on their menu, I still will consider that fast food and not quite really good, clean, healthy eating. So I just want to put that out there. So one of my classmates, actually, in my English class, who I was talking to about food deserts, she had no idea what a food desert was. But when I explained it to her, she said, wow, I've actually been living in a food desert my entire life. So that's I thought that was really interesting. So there's 3 articles, scholarly articles that I found on JSTOR that explore food deserts really in depth, and they really give a full scale about food deserts and actually do some really good research. So this first article is titled "The Determinants of Food Deserts." It was written by Pedro A. Alviola, Rodolfo Nega, Michael R. Thompson, and Zhongyi Wang. So basically, to summarize the article, right, they looked at rural and urban communities in Arkansas over a 5-year period to try and see which area had more food deserts, right, rural or urban communities. There's been a lot of debate on whether or not food deserts are more of a problem in urban communities, more specifically Black communities, rather than in the suburban white communities, and in this case, rural farmland areas. So I'm going to, give me one moment, find a couple little interesting pieces to highlight on it. So one really interesting point that they made to highlight was they use graphs, right? They use graphs, they use charts and tables to show their findings. Over time, they took into account, okay, who in this household went to college? What was the income for the family? How close was this house to a convenience store, right? And they really kind of just looked over as much as they could over a 7-year period, comparing between rural and urban communities. And they really got some good information, and give me one moment, I will be able to find the conclusion. And let me just read this out for you guys. In this study, we examined the food environment facing low-income urban and rural communities in Arkansas over the 2004 to 2010 period. We find no meaningful evidence that urban communities with higher minority populations or communities with lower median income face less access to grocery stores, while urban minority areas were more likely to be classified. Excuse me, I lost my place. Were more likely to be classified as food deserts. The effect was small, and higher minority areas actually had a higher 2-mile grocery store densities. There is evidence, however, that residents in higher minority urban areas face larger densities of convenience stores and fast food restaurants, retail formats that generally provide unhealthy food options. In rural areas, communities with a higher proportion of vacant housing units had lower access to grocery stores, and this finding was consistent across the different measures of grocery store access. This suggests that Arkansas in low-income rural areas with declining populations may be specifically at risk for low access to healthy food options. Aside from vacancy rates in rural areas, our findings do not suggest that communities that face a higher prevalence of social and economic deprivation are more likely to lack access to healthy food sources. However, Arkansans living in food deserts do appear to have more exposure to fast food restaurants and convenience stores. Thus, being in a food desert may disadvantage diet quality, both in terms of less access to healthy foods and greater access to unhealthy ones. So yeah, basically, it was initially thought, right, that just black families were the ones who suffered most from food desert inequality, but actually it really expands to all walks of life. And that is why we really need to crack down on food deserts, because it's affecting really everyone around the country. It doesn't matter what neighborhood you live in. So the second article I want to highlight really quickly talks about food deserts and obesity in children. This article, they more or less, right, they also use graphs and tables and charts to monitor people's eating habits over an area of time. I have the abstract here, and I'll read that out. It says, we utilize a panel data set from 2007 to 2009 on the state of Arkansas to identify and determine the effect of food deserts on school district obesity rates. We define food deserts as low-income areas with limited food access. Using both classical panel data models and spatial error models, we find no statistically significant relationship between school district obesity rates and the existence of food deserts in Arkansas. This finding is consistent across different model specifications, in spatial, panel, or cross-sectional analysis, and with or without urban school district in the data. So yeah, like I mentioned before, there's not a lot of variance per se. They've said no statistically significant relationship between school district obesity rates. However, the fact that they were monitoring it in the first place does raise awareness for food deserts and does keep people thinking about this as a whole, because we do really need to monitor these food deserts in communities all across different districts around the country. What I found interesting about these two articles was that both were measured in Arkansas. I'm not sure why or how. Maybe it's some crazy coincidence that all of these studies come from Arkansas, but I just thought that was kind of interesting how there's so much data about food deserts coming just from this one state. So that's something to look into more potentially. I'm kind of going a little over time, but I want to wrap up here with one last article on food deserts. This one is from the Journal of Applied Social Science. Now with this article, they kind of saw a different approach to food deserts. I do have the abstract here in front of me, but since I am running a little bit over time, I won't go through it all. But basically, they said that there's way too much way too many fine details that aren't being addressed when it comes to food desert studies. And people aren't really applying certain things about, okay, how close is one grocery store compared to another grocery store? And how close is the supermarket, say, to a corner store? And it kind of muddles all that stuff together where you don't really have good conclusive data. And this article basically tries to say that we don't really, of all the data that we do have about food deserts, right, you can't really use all of it because some of it is flawed because they didn't take certain things into account. But all in all, the article is happy, though, that we are trying to make a difference, but we really need to narrow down our studies because there's way too much up for debate about how credible some of these studies are. They kind of put it really well here in the abstract. They said, these explanations are overly simplistic. Over the last 20 years, a stream of research has begun to flow that explores how access to food environments, including supermarket, grocery store, and food retail establishments, impact food shopping habits and thus nutritional habits. We discuss some of the limitations associated with the food desert and accessibility literature, including conceptual issues, the urban bias in research, methodological limitations, and the absence of theory. So they do appreciate what is being done for the community with food deserts, but they still believe that there is more that needs to be done. Thank you for listening to my podcast, and have a good day. Thank you. Bye.